All right, and welcome to the first official episode of the Foolosopher's podcast, formerly known as the Fulati Fitness Podcast. So, all in all, we're actually on episode number 13. But nevertheless, today I'm joined by my guy Joseph, aka Mr. Masculine Theory himself, a man with a lot of knowledge and wisdom when it comes to this overall science of attaining our highest potential as men on the mental, physical, and spiritual realms of reality. So, appreciate you joining the podcast, man, and I'm ready to run it up.
That's quite an introduction. Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure's all mine. Yeah, man, I'm excited.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So, just to start off the podcast, man, I wanted to ask you, Joseph, what was life like before masculine theory and before the path that we see you on today? And what were the events that essentially kind of led this whole process to unfold?
Mm. I think a word that epitomizes my lifestyle before would probably be debauchery. I think that comes debauchery, hedonism. It's probably very, very consistent and accurate words to use to describe my lifestyle. Yeah, I don't think my story is any too dissimilar from maybe perhaps yours, perhaps other men that may be listening. I'm 30 years old now. Just had my birthday about a month ago, and when I fully started to bring a little bit more conscientiousness into my life, I was probably around 23. And I have told the story before, but I'll give you the cliff notes. Essentially, is that I do believe that wherever you are in life, there's typically two, perhaps, options or roads or paths that inevitably you come to, and that can be by your fruition, or it can be the fruition of higher forces above you. Call it God, call it cosmos, universe, whatever word is most synonymous, for you. And if you ignore it, if you ignore, let's say, the opportunities that God and cosmos offers you, He will humble you. It will humble you in a way that can be very violent. It was ego destroying for myself. So again, I'll stop teasing, but essentially I was in the grips of my hedonism when I was at university here in the UK, smoking weed, doing drugs, PMO, promiscuity. You understand. I'm sure people do
Yeah.
understand. And I felt like my life purely revolved around squeezing as much pleasure as I could out of any and every given moment, be that through the aforementioned vices, to the point where I remember it was actually towards the end of my final year, which was quite fortuitous, I would say. I was picking up my usual Q from my dealer. Q is about £80 worth of cannabis here in the UK. I'm not sure how many grams that is, but I was spending a lot of money. And I remember my dealer was a different dealer. It was a woman, which was really interesting. That sticks out to me because I never picked up from a woman before. And it turns out what she sold me was actually called Prison Spice. There's some other street names. It's called Bird Killer, Green Heroin, and it's actually closer to a psychedelic than it maybe is a cannabis. And well, you're not supposed to take it in the same way that you would, cannabis. And essentially, the introduction of this very new and artificial chemical into my system triggered what's called or my doctors at the time called it a first episode psychosis. Basically, I literally went insane, for lack of a better word. Not to pass out too many details, but I read the police report, and apparently I was found naked and screaming in my university library. That's genuinely where they found me. What was actually quite funny about reading the report is that the individuals thought it was like a hazing for like you have the football team or the basketball team,
A
or
frat.
whatever team, the frat. They,
Yeah.
they thought that it was like a part of the hazing deal, right? Which is quite good actually, because again, a very, very embarrassing situation.
Mhm.
Me being stark bollock naked in front of literally everybody that I knew at university. They took me to prison, and then they found out that this was a mental episode. Then they took me to a mental hospital, um, and I stayed in that mental hospital for 28 days. It's called a Section 2 under UK mental health, which basically means you can't leave the hospital because there's a chance you'll kill yourself or you'll kill other
Mhm.
people. And during that 28-day period, you're breaking bread with paranoid schizophrenics and people with bipolar disorder. Is very, very disconcerting. I mean, it's the type of setting whereby they have to count the cutlery after your meals. You know, I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, imagine working at one of these places. You got 20 pairs of cutlery, 18, 19, who's okay. Nobody can leave until
Mhm.
we find that 20th
Yeah.
pair, right? So this is the kind of environment I'm in. For 28 days, I can't leave. And the most painful part of the process was probably the boredom, because it's like the way I describe it, it's like you're finally forced to look into the mirror.
Mm.
Yeah. You cannot escape. You can't distract yourself. You can't get away. You can't go back to the weed. You can't go back to the pleasure. It is a brutal self-evaluation. That's what it was. So I did that. I brutally evaluated myself for 28 days. And actually, um, the inception of masculine theory came to me when I was at hospital. When I was in hospital, it wasn't called masculine theory then. Um, my initial premise was to the initial premise was around the fact that I can't be the only one that this has happened to,
Mm.
essentially, which is actually what I usually advise people to do if they're starting any entrepreneurship journey is be your first client,
Mm.
right? You have a problem right now. Maybe you've eaten too much, right? You're putting on too much weight. Solve your weight problem, right? And then teach it to other people. So I thought, can I solve my drug problem? Can I solve my addiction problem? Can I solve my addiction to pleasure, fundamentally? And it was under the guise of holistic health. After I left, I refined my message a little bit more and decided, as much as I want to help everyone, it's men that I have the most affinity towards. It's men that I have the most experience, with. And masculine theory is born, and I think that's probably a apt introduction to me and masculine theory.
Hmm. So after that crazy episode of basically getting spiced and just overall thinking that you're getting weed and you just get a totally hallucinogenic drug that makes you go crazy in that time period where you're in the prison, did you receive, like, if you want to call it, gnosis, which means knowledge that is found within you? Was it a sense of like an inner vision that you're like, okay, this is what I need to do next in order for me to build that bridge outside of this essential downward spiraling descent towards degeneracy that I've been stuck in for so long?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's probably accurate to say for sure. Um, Again, it's interesting. Um, for me, when I try to recall some of the insights that I had during that experience, it's very difficult for me because um, I was in and out of consciousness through certain periods. Like, genuinely, I have like big holes in my memory. Like, I do get insights where I get flashes of me being in the library. I also get flashes of me being in the back of the police car in prison. And then there was one. The reason I say I was in and out of consciousness is because I remember they put me into one hospital, but the hospital didn't have too many beds for long stay. So that was a local hospital, which was probably about 30 minutes away from me. And then I woke up in another hospital, which was in the Midlands of the country, which is 6 hours away. And I do not remember how I got there. So, and then during, I remember one of the most difficult periods was they had to put me in isolation for the first, I think it was maybe 48 to, but the 2 to 3 days is when it was the worst because the active component of the chemical is at its most potent. And they put me in something called isolation, which is basically it is literally a room with pads. Like if you watch, I don't know, the Joker or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that is actually the film. He's like put in a room
Yeah.
by himself with pads so he can't like throw himself against the wall and
Uh-huh.
kill himself. Right? I was literally put in one of those rooms with a glass window and blinds over one side so I couldn't see out, but people could see in. And that was when I was having really profound hallucinations. I remember, and this is again, I find it difficult to discern maybe true gnosis as you've kind of described it from some of those experiences. But there were moments when I was having those experiences where I could see, this is going to sound again kind of trippy, but I could see like my own chakra systems, like I could see the colors. And by the way, this is when I had no knowledge of this stuff, right? I'd never been interested in spirituality. I was a hard atheist at that point. I was very rational, scientific, logical. If I can't see it and discern it through my senses, then it doesn't exist. And I, remember seeing the colors. I remember actually lying on my back, looking up at the ceiling and seeing, the colors as it corresponds to the levels of, my sacral to my cranial spine. And I didn't know, what it meant at the time. One thing that was very, very trippy as well is I remember my mother coming to visit me, and she gave me The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. That was the first book that she gave me. And if anybody knows my content, I speak about this book in the highest regards. It was the book that fully formalized and allowed me to understand and conceptualize the value of presence and the power. And again, ironically, as the title suggests, the power of now, because I never knew what it meant to be present. And it's the highest value. And I didn't read before then as well. So she gave me that book. And the irony with the whole, with that experience is that I was too distraught to even pick that book up and read it in there. I actually read the book after I got out of hospital. And what was really funny is if I'd read the book when I was in hospital, I would have been fine. I would have been okay. So it's just interesting how God works in mysterious ways like that. He gave me the tools that I needed to really alleviate a lot of pain and suffering in that hospital. But I couldn't sit with it,
So all in all, like when I'm from an outside perspective looking at this, it's what psychologists like Carl Jung talk about as the dark night of the soul. You got your ego absolutely dismantled and dissolved, where that version of Joseph of living a life of just only thinking about pleasure, only thinking about the lower three chakras, which is correlated to survival, sex, and status. That's like what the majority of, if you want to call it the Maya, the Matrix, the illusion, the material world is revolving around. This is what you've been programmed to believe. All of that was just completely just torn to shreds in that isolation period. And this is kind of similar to something that I went through myself through an ego death, but it was not through prison system, but it was through psychedelics. But it's very kind of similar, the mirror effects of that. So I wanted to ask you, because I've gone through that same kind of process of where your old self is no longer like, it's still there, the programming is still there, but you realize that there's like a glitch in it now. There is a barrier that has been broken that allows you to look at things beyond just what you've been programmed to believe, beyond just what everyone else is doing. So I wanted to ask you, what were the initial steps that you went on, and the pathway you just said right there? You never read a book in your entire life before that. You didn't read really, you know what I mean? And aside from reading and the overall path of, if you want to call it self-improvement, what was the initial kind of things that you jumped right into after that period of 28 days in jail, to the point where now you're starting to build the bridge or build the staircase towards your highest self, which we see you walking towards today on Masculine Theory?
It's a good question. I think there's one part of what you said there that I'll kind of cling to, which is really the idea of made me think about kind of reprogramming and the stories that you fundamentally tell yourself about who you were. I remember very vividly, like when I got out of hospital, I didn't even want to wear the clothes I usually wore. It was a really strange experience. It was like I was wearing somebody else's clothes. So it's very synonymous with this idea of ego death. You create a character and you dress a certain way, you present and market yourself to the world in a certain way, what music you listen to, what your interests are, how you introduce yourself to people. And the really terrifying thing for me, especially the first month or two, because I was still very, very depressed when I got out, was I just didn't really know who I was anymore. I didn't know what to wear. I didn't know what music to listen to. I didn't know who to
Mm-hmm.
hang out with. And as much as that was a terrifying experience for me, I started to realize on the other side of the coin that it was very kind of liberating, because then I had an opportunity to kind of design my life depending on what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been saying this thing very recently that maybe for some people is very illuminating and for others is very irritating. But what you choose to believe is always true. So in with that kind of I suppose you could say premise, I was starting to ask myself what would be really conducive for me to believe is true and what isn't conducive to me to believe is true. So one of the reasons that I used to tell people why I used to smoke a lot of weed was because I had terrible insomnia, right? I couldn't sleep throughout the night without smoking weed, right? And then I started asking myself the question, is it valuable to believe that that's true? And the answer was very easily no. It's not valuable at all. Why would why would anybody choose to believe that was true? Because now I'm a slave to something. Now I've given my power away to something else. So I started to look at that story and start to go, well, what would be a better story to tell yourself, or how could you address this issue? And one of the first practical things pertaining to your question that I started to do was I started to meditate. I started to just sit, and instead of my evening joint where I would, skin up and go out in the garden, smoke a joint, and pass out, I would, brush my teeth, and before I would sit down and go to bed, I would just sit down on the floor and meditate. And it was very, very slow at first. It was like 2 minutes at a time, but then 2 minutes became five, and then five became 10 and 15. And now it's 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes in the evening. And I kind of I really do think above everything that was kind of the bedrock in which I kind of built my church. Everything kind of stemmed from my ability to self-regulate. I mean, the more and more I learn about meditation, the more and more I believe that it is a skill that has influence in every single facet of your life. I don't care if you're, a weightlifter, or you're into programming or coding or whatever the case may be. Is every single, even minor action or habit in your life can be greatly influenced by a meditation habit.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that idea stemmed from reading The Power of Now and
Mm-hmm.
just trying to become fundamentally present. And then, as an extension from that, it was and this is really the key for anybody that is a keen meditator, is how do I make sure the meditation doesn't stop as soon as I get off the pillow?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that for me was the real game changer, is that it doesn't stop when you come off the pillow. When people say I meditate, they often conjure up ideas of them in Padmasana or Siddhasana or Sukhasana on a I don't know if you can see it, but I've got a little meditation pillow behind me, and then they do their 10 minutes and 20 minutes and then it's done. It doesn't have to be done.
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing that you can choose to believe or not to believe, as if it's conducive to your life or not. So that was the first thing. And then reading, I'm not going to go too much into that. We could perhaps circle back round to it, but I realized that I was very intellectually and cognitively and even socially inept. Like, my schools were very, very poor, being 23 years old, and I wasn't a studious individual. I don't think I was unintelligent by any stretch of the imagination, but depending on, because I have a sense maybe of ego and pride, which can be viewed in a negative way or a positive way, depending on how you see it. I hold myself to a higher standard, and for 23, I was very disappointed in terms of where I was. So I just started to gorge on everything, and one of the actually main reasons that I started Masculine Theory, and a lot of people don't believe me when I say this, is one of the reasons that I started recording myself uh, making videos was I read a book called Accelerated Learning by Brian Tracy. And one of the key premises of the book was that you have greater memory recall when you teach.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, if you go to my earlier videos, all my videos would um, like, if you could be a fly on the wall and watch me in my father's house in my bedroom, would be able to read for half an hour. I would find a concept in the chapter that I read that I found quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I would switch on the camera, go in front of my whiteboard and I would just try to explain it in the best way possible. My recall got really, really, really good. And then maybe just one last practical one would be, during that self-analysis, it was really the understanding that my North Star, for as long as I could remember, being 23, revolved around how can I squeeze again as much pleasure as I can out of the experience.
Mhm.
What would be a valuable tool for me to create more distance between that? And it was fasting.
Mm.
And fasting in the sense that, a lot of people do fasting for, nutritional benefits, for health benefits, and I certainly would agree that that's one of the reasons why I do it, but it wasn't my primary purpose. My primary purpose was to see if I could create greater distance between my reflex for food. I'd eaten so long, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, in a very habitual manner, and I was just experimenting with, well, just because I have a sensation that arises in my body that tells me that my belly is empty, is that destiny? Is that fate that I must succumb to that particular emotion and feeling and fuel my belly? Well, the answer is no. The answer is, irrespective of how I feel, doesn't dictate what is mandatory that I do.
Mhm.
And that extends a lot of the masculine theory philosophy, really.
Yeah, masculine theory as a philosophy is, in my eyes, as someone who's been watching it for quite some time, about self mastery, which is something that I kind of am very a big proponent of. And what you just said right there, when it comes to fasting, goes hand in hand with that. The effects fasting gives you on the mental side of things is great. The physical side of things is great, but on the spiritual side of things, it is the ability to perceive and observe those emotions of hunger, those emotions of anger, those emotions of boredom, and be like, okay, I'm not going to automatically do this compulsive action just because these emotions arise.
Mm,
Just because you're angry doesn't mean you have to go punch someone in the face. I have some self-control. I can master that. And this is what, within the Vedic tradition, as you know, the time period that we're living in right now, Kali Yuga, this is where that is completely gone. Self-control is completely gone, and the ability to essentially be a master of your own vessel, be the master of your own ship, is just completely out of the ordinary for most people. They are all slaves to the senses. So when it comes to fasting, that's almost like a gateway into all these different types of things that you talk about. So I wanted to ask you, essentially, where did you learn about fasting? Because in the modern day world, not many people fast. Like you just said right there, you ate breakfast, lunch, dinner at the same time period. So whenever you're hungry, or whenever your stomach says it's hungry, you have to feed it. And I always bring up this analogy where I have dogs that I take care of, and I walk every single day, of course. But if my dog, imagine in the morning, just walks into my room, bang, 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 hey man, it's time to fucking walk. Like, I have to go get up and just make it, I have to take it out wherever it wants to. The dog is walking me. I'm not walking the dog anymore.
mm,
So that's
mm,
the same premise that's going on within all these different types of emotions, from hunger, from lust, of course, that we can talk about when it comes to the practice of fasting on the sexual level, which is SR and celibacy. But I want to ask you specifically, when it comes to fasting on the physical sense with hunger, what was the first introduction for you into this practice? What did you think about it before? You're like, man, I've been eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the same exact times for 23 years of my life. Like, that's, you're gonna start, I'm gonna starve myself, I'm gonna lose muscle. Like, all of us have probably thought about that. I'm gonna lose all my gains, I gotta eat every 2 hours, get the protein shakes in. But then what allowed you to finally be like, okay, let me give it a shot? And what was your first initial reaction to how powerful this stuff is when it comes to allowing you to not be walked by that dog anymore, but rather you take back control, and now you're walking the dog of your own vessel, of your own self?
mm. It's a great analogy, by the way. I'll probably have to steal that one.
I go for it, yeah.
Um, yeah, as I said, I really learned, um, about it from the spiritual perspective
Hmm.
first. Again, I wasn't. as much as, again, I completely agree with you. There's enormous merit and utility in the cognitive faculties and, autophagy, and we can certainly discuss that. But
Mhm.
I read a book called "Living the Bhagavad Gita" by Ram Dass,
Mm.
which is a really tremendous Western interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu scriptures, the
Mhm.
Vedas. And there was a really interesting chapter in there that I'll try and describe. And basically, if you don't know who Ram Dass is, very popular. He's passed, well, I shouldn't say passed away, he's left his body.
Mhm.
Um, and he was a Western psychologist, again, very, very rational, logical, scientific individual
Mhm.
who went over to India to study from his guru. And I'm blanking on the name, it begins with an M.
Neem Karoli Baba.
Might be him. I know
Yeah.
I'm thinking of him. But essentially, he went to live in a. I'm blanking on the term.
Ashram.
Ashram. He went to live in an ashram
Mhm.
and found his guru. And he asked him one day, should I fast? Because fasting is very, very big in India. And he's asking, how long should I be fasting for? And the guru says, fast for 5 days. Fast for 5. You feel good after 5 days, right? And it's really interesting reading because he's kind of journaling and documenting how his 5 days are going. And he all he's really writing about in his diary is how hungry he is. Yeah. And he gets to the end of the 5 days and he comes back to his guru and he says, I've done 5 days, I'm really proud of myself. And the guru's like, you feel proud of yourself? Yeah. You feel good? You feel accomplished? And he was like, yeah, but I was always thinking about being hungry. And it was like, you weren't really fasting. Now, your belly was empty, but you didn't really get it. And he's trying to convey the point. What we're kind of alluding to is that fasting is a refrainment from attachment.
Mhm.
That's really what it is. Fasting is detachment. And um, he proceeds to then explain how he came about this, because he fasted again, but he threw himself into very altruistic work, helping the community, feeding the homeless, finding shelter for them. And he found that it was so much easier when he was doing that, as opposed to kind of just sitting in this state of, I mean, it's kind of like when you ask people when they say that they've stopped smoking, and they tell you how many days it's been since they had their last cigarette. They may have stopped smoking for 36 days, 3 hours and 22 minutes and 5 seconds, but they're still they're still attached
Mhm.
in here,
Mhm.
really. And I found that really, really interesting as it pertained to my attachment to not food, because I don't really feel that I had a tremendous problem with food, but the drugs, the PMO for me was the real issue, and that's what motivated me to kind of go down this particular path. So that was the start of it. And then one of the big things was, as you kind of alluded to it there, I was really concerned about, because I was really big into the gym. I still am into training and fitness, and I was very, very scared that I was going to waste away and
Yeah.
shrivel away, and all my hard work of the last 5 years, 6 years, 7 years was going to be undone. So
Mhm.
before I started to go on extensive fast, I did intermittent for a while, but I started to explore, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. I started doing a lot of research and starting to pick up more, nutritional and scientific books as it pertains to fasting, as opposed to the spiritual ones. And what I found in there was really, really interesting. Of course, I should say, as I suppose, a preface to all of this, if you do extensive fasting for long periods of time, you will lose weight. It's going to happen. That's just
Mhm.
the natural laws of um, what you would say consumption and energy expenditure, right? But if you do it intelligently and you do it sporadically, what you actually find is there's a muscle sparing effect that fasting has. You get stem cells upregulating and growth hormone upregulating, all these really powerful hormones in your body. And the way I always explain it is, you have to understand that your body has an intelligence that most people don't experience, because we live in a world of comfort. The idea being that if if you're fasting, the body is interpreting that as a lack of resources, right? A lack of resources available. And what that message does to the body, it signals and upregulates the faculties that will allow you to acquire the resources,
Mm-hmm.
right? And your body's not going to roll. You are not so easily killed, is something that I always say. You're always going to fight really hard before that actually happens. You're going to get this. It's like that burst of adrenaline. If you've ever you practice, Brazilian jiu-jitsu or Muay Thai, when you're in a real fight and your body's interpreting that as a threat to your life, there's a huge uptake in energy you get before you roll over and die. And the same is true for fasting. So
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make logical, rational sense for the body to get rid of the mechanisms and the systems by which you're going to acquire your next meal, which is your performance, your athletic performance.
Mm-hmm.
So that was always really interesting to me, and that goaded me and allowed me to really, I suppose, dive and fall into the practice as much as I did, to the point where I wrote my first book on fasting.
Mm-hmm.
And the cognitive benefits as well. The idea that if your body isn't busy digesting and going through peristalsis, that you're going to have more energy available for cognitive function, and you just feel tremendous. There's a distance and space that you create from the dopamine and serotonin that you secrete in relation to the food that you're eating, meaning that when you do break your fasts, forget about going to a 3 Michelin star restaurant. You can eat a boiled egg and it will taste
Yeah.
like you've gone to a 3 Michelin star restaurant. But yeah, I think that probably answers your question the best I can.
Yeah, no, perfectly said. And that's something that people have to try them for themselves,
Sure,
of
sure.
actually seeing the benefits of fasting. We can talk about, okay, man, your mind is super clear, super sharp, and your physical body is not going to just, if you don't eat for a day, completely just lose all the weight, lose all the muscle that you had. I grew up skinny my entire life, and since I've been actually implementing fasting for the past 4 to 5 years of my life, not only am I the biggest, the strongest, the most athletic, I feel the most like a well-oiled machine, because I'm not just, of course the diet has changed over time, but these periodic fasts that I do at least a 24 to 36 every full moon every month, but
Nice.
every quarter I try to do a at least 3 day fast. So funny enough, I just did it last week, because it was the start of the new quarter.
Hmm.
To me, in my perspective, long term, like the extended fast, 72 hours and plus, that's the closest that I've gotten to psychedelic experiences without taking psychedelics, through breath work and long fast. Like, when I mean long fast, I'm talking about, again, 72 hours plus. But that's the intermittent fasting, and the short term from 24 to 48 is a lot of mental and physical benefits. But past that, it gets much more spiritual, in a sense where you start to tap into states of consciousness that your day-to-day normal existence, it's very hard to get to. It's almost acts as a supplement to the overall
Mm.
experience. And that's why I call psychedelics steroids for spirituality. I've said it multiple times that essentially you take psychedelics and you go from those base levels of consciousness all the way to those states of samadhi, if you want to call it. I've called it psychedelic induced samadhi. It's a shortcut to samadhi, or better yet, psychedelics are a free trial for spiritual freedom. So essentially, you go all the way up to the top. You might have these transcendental experiences, but you come all the way back down to the bottom. And unless you learn the spiritual foundations and the teachings that you've talked about, from like the Bhagavad Gita, from fasting, from just purifying yourself from within, you're not going to be able to sustain those states of consciousness, which is why you can take gear, you can take steroids and get jacked, get huge. But I've seen people in that I know, that I grew up with, they get huge and then boom, they come right back down once they're off the steroids. Like people who tap into those states that these sages, that these yogis take years to build up, like a natural bodybuilder builds up to that
Mm.
point through repetition, through fasting, through austerities, through building up that tapas, as they call in the Vedic tradition, and then they can actually stay at those states. So I want to ask you essentially, when it comes to getting into those higher states through these extended fasts, these longer fasts, where you start to feel that detachment from the body, not in a sense where you're not the body, but the body's no longer controlling you. What is something that you would tell maybe your younger self of like, man, no, if you actually push this and see how resilient your body really is and go beyond the brain, go beyond the mind, you will tap into levels of bliss, almost like where even just smelling the grass, even just smelling the air, you're like in a ecstatic, euphoric state when you are fasting for a good amount of time. Because I know obviously you've probably done extended fast to that level. So I just want to hear your perspective and what you would recommend to people when they say, okay, man, I've done the intermittent, I've done the 24, but like the extended stuff, like I don't want to touch that. I'm going to lose muscle. I'm going to do this, you know?
Hmm. Well, the first thing I'll say is a very hard sell.
Yeah.
And if you pitched it to, if you were trying to pitch it to a younger version of me, that would be a very, very difficult sell. I think the best way is, perhaps to convey it in terms of, the scientific, and then, if we can try and supplement that with, how you can conceptualize this in a spiritual way. So I think the easiest and most logical and rational way that I would try and convey it to somebody, again, as stubborn as I was the idea that the synaptic cleft in your brain from the electrical into the chemical is essentially where you experience pleasure, right? And many people, unbeknownst to them, through whatever vice it may be, have sitting in that cleft, especially the modern Western man, and I would say woman as well, so much dopamine just floating in this nebula right here, to the point where the clefts are so desensitized to it. It really takes a lot for you to squeeze, be it through cigarettes or nicotine, through weed, through adult material. I don't care what it is, to even get, that kind of high that people are looking for, right? What fasting does, and I mean fasting in the sense, and my definition is not just in terms of food, but let's say a conscious refrainment from pleasure,
Mm-hmm.
is almost like a clearing out of this particular area right here, to the point where, and it goes back to exactly what you just said, is even smelling grass, feels like like you're pinning heroin or something like that. Like it really is. And again, people laugh. You can laugh. Um, I don't expect people to take my word for it. You'll have to experience it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But when you when you start to really clean out your closet, as it were, in respects to your neurochemistry, and you kind of give yourself a hard reset and you start again, you'll be amazed at how much pleasure you can start to reap from very, very novel things.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first things that I found was, you know, ecstasy or orgasmic, was, music. Just listening to some of your favorite records of some of your favorite artists, and it feels like you're listening to your favorite record for the first time all over again. And it's that's kind of high. It's almost intoxicating. And I don't want us to get lost in the pleasure aspect, but I think that's the direction that I would start to move people in. Is kind of like a hard reset. And
Mm-hmm.
then what I will say, if the individual is receptive to maybe a spiritual conversation, and maybe reaching altered states of consciousness, and you're mentioning samadhi, which is connection to all, yoga, union, universal consciousness, is when you're starting to create the way I always convey it is, you're starting to create more space between the sensations of the body and the thoughts of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And in that way, there comes a recognition. And I got there through, meditation, not really a fasting, it was more meditation for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I finally got to an understanding that I was in possession of a body and possession of a mind. But ultimately, the premise that you are these things is incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in fact you are, that which dwells within, without, at man's soul, whatever word that you want to use. And after that, and I don't necessarily think intellectually you can understand it. I think maybe it's closer to a feeling than it maybe is an understanding, but I think it's more than a feeling. I think it's more of a presence kind of thing. Presence is a really difficult thing to describe because it's almost like you're running around the circumference of a circle trying to describe what's in the middle. Words aren't really a good tool to describe it. It's experiential, because if you're truly present, then you're in a state of no mind, and you're just in that flow, in that river of life. I would really to experience the point that I'm trying to make. The best resource I would give, going back to your question, an individual who is curious about it, would be the Power of Now book. One of the reasons that I like that book the best is that there's many books that try and describe what we're trying to describe as presence. But the reason that I believe that Eckhart Tolle does the best, or comes closest, is because if you read the book, there's a little, it almost looks like a little like clef or something that you might read in music after a couple paragraphs, and the point of the symbol is that as you're reading the book and you look at the symbol, is you're supposed to kind of pause and stop reading and just really inhabit your body. You're just supposed to kind of stop and just really be in that now moment. And there, at the end of every single paragraph or every profound point he tries to make, and as I was reading the book, I finally experienced, not understood. If you're listening to this, I'm using deliberate language here. It's not an understanding; it's an experiencing that is going to happen to you. I experienced what the words were trying to convey, and once I experienced that, I couldn't go back to the old paradigm of thinking, and I was forever changed from that. I truly got to an experience whereby I was neither in a state of thinking nor in really a state of feeling. I was unified in both, and I think that's what it is. It's unification of the body and it's unification of the mind. And it's very subtle, but it's transcendental. I'm not trying to convey something whereby the walls are melting and you're seeing colors and it's that kind of classic. I'm looking at your wallpaper going like that's not what's going to happen. But it's almost like this intense, you live so intensely that it almost wakes you up. And that is where the phrase, I mean, it's been dominated by the leftists now. The leftists kind of say that's where the phrase kind of like woke comes. That's where the pop culture neo waking up out of the matrix comes. It's a moment where you realize you are completely in possession of your body and your mind and your soul, and you live so relentlessly in the now. Time ceases to exist, and that for me is one of the. If you've never experienced that before, I think it happens to most people, probably between the ages of 20 and 25. They may get there, they may not, but it's one of the trippiest experiences. And I'll just end on this little analogy because I think or a little story, because I think it comes closest to what I'm trying to describe. But in the UK, there's a big football culture, right? I don't know what the culture is in the States or wherever you are listening to this, but the story I always give is the now is kind of like this. Is I remember vividly when I was a kid, maybe like 10, 11 years old, going to the park on the weekend with my boys, right? And playing football in the park, right? And you're playing all day, and then this happens, right? You get a phone call, or one of your friends get a phone call from their parents, and they go, where are you? It's dinner time, right? Your dinner's on the table, it's cold, and you kind of look around, right? And it's dark, and you think to yourself, what just happened, right? I've been here since 1 p.m. and it's just disappeared. you are living so intensely, so in the now, that time ceases to exist.
Mhm.
And the saddest part of that is you lose that. You lose that when you start to develop an ego. So around 13, 14, 15, you start thinking about, who am I? How do I present myself in the world? Well, that doesn't matter. You come to live like the child again. There's a very famous quote: you will not enter the kingdom of God until you become like the child again. And that's essentially what I'm trying to describe.
Mhm. Beautifully said. Yeah, that state of consciousness, like a child, where you are just flowing in the Tao, in the present moment, where you're not thinking about, oh, what does this guy think of me? You're not thinking about, oh, should I approach like this so I can get this thing out of it? You're just flowing with life. That's why they call, in the Buddhist teachings, they have this saying where it says, the Buddha's mind is like a baby's mind, not in a sense where the Buddha's mind is like they don't know how to talk and this and that, but it's purely present. It's not contaminated by desire, by attachment, and it's just purely just in a state of flow where meditation can get you into there, fasting can get you into there, all these different types of things that you talk about when it comes to masculine theory. And another thing that you talk about that I also practice and talk about a lot on my channel is this whole journey of semen retention and celibacy, which is, in my opinion, almost like a super fuel for these pursuits of purifying yourself from within, unlocking your mind, and no longer being a slave to, in, if I'm being honest, the strongest chain, the strongest bond that keeps you stuck within that illusionary world that is disconnecting you from that state, from that inner child state of mind where you're in the flow. When you're always looking at things outside and external achievements, external pleasures, you can never find that true joy that resides within. And there's a great analogy within the Bhagavad Gita, I'm pretty sure you remember this, that Krishna is talking to Arjuna about what meditation is about. And he states essentially, look at a tortoise, look at a turtle, and the turtle has its arms out of its shell, its legs out of its shell, and its head out of its shell. And that is synonymous to your energy, your attention, your focus, which is all being drawn out into the external world, thinking about survival, sex, status, those things that society, the matrix, the mind, the illusion wants to keep you thinking about, so it siphons away your energy. You're no longer able to redirect the energy back inwards. But the tortoise, the turtle, when it brings its arms back into its shell, it's bringing its head back into its shell, its legs back into its shell. What in reality that it's an analogy towards you bringing your energy not back into the shell but back into yourself. And that kind of is a direct correlation to this practices of meditation, from fasting, and now SR. I wanted to ask you, you just mentioned it would be a hard sell to tell your younger self about fasting. I think it would be even a harder sell to tell them, hey man, don't watch porn, don't be in this hookup culture scene. Like, that's probably the hardest sell when it comes to this overall practice. So I wanted to ask you essentially, how did you first learn about it? I'm pretty sure it was through the books that you were reading at this time, but I wanted to ask you kind of what made you take it like seriously. What made you actually be like, oh, it's worth a try, it's worth a shot? Because this overall pleasure, it's, like I said, the strongest chain for most guys. This is why they program and they just overall propagate promiscuity to us, telling us, oh, if you don't have 100 girls on your body count, you're not a true man. If you really want to be the top G, the alpha, the red pill guy, you need to have all the cars, the clothes, the money, the hoes. Like, that's true happiness that you'll find in life as a man. And this is why one of the big reasons I really respect your brand and your message is you're bringing back the true masculine essence of a not a traditional man. I don't really even like that word. A divine masculine man that you've seen throughout time, throughout these ancient traditions of what it means not to be a man, but actually embody the divine masculine essence, where you're no longer a slave to your senses. You're no longer dependent on the external world to give you pleasure. You're finding it from within by retracting, like that turtle, like that tortoise, through these practices of renunciation. So how would you preface this to your younger self, trying to sell SR and celibacy to him? And I wanted to ask you, like, what was your first initial introduction to it? How did you go about actually practicing it seriously? What were the benefits? And now, since you've been on it for quite some time, what is the biggest revelations from this journey? Because again, it's not an easy journey, but for the people that are truly walking the path, you see more of those universal rewards in this journey, that it's simply like something you cannot put into words, as we've said before, but it's just something where you start to awaken that spiritual side of you as a man that is so cut off and so disconnected in the modern times that we're living in today.
Sure. Well, this again was the hardest pitch for me, and again, I recall when I first, again, you asked as part of your question, when was my first discovery of it? I think I discovered it. I think honestly, it was a YouTube video or maybe a Reddit post, and I rejected it immediately.
Mhm.
I rejected the notion of it. I thought, this isn't something that's worth my time. I'm sure this is, silly. I'm sure this is false. Because again, I want to be as honest and forthcoming. I was doing, meditation, fasting, and reading spiritual books, but I didn't think that this was a problem for maybe 6 to 9 months, you know. And then, I started to really look into, what are the areas. I think it might have been a David Hawkins book, actually, when I was looking at, or starting to learn about what are the lowest emotions that a human being can experience, shame and
Mhm.
guilt. And I was like, what are the things that are putting me into shame and guilt? And uh, yeah, bingo.
Mhm.
So I started to really go, and I would encourage, and this would be my soft pitch, to anyone is, I like to approach life from the perspective of life is kind of like a science experiment. I think
Mhm.
that's one of the most intelligent ways you can approach it. And somebody might have a hypothesis, right? And let's say the hypothesis is, PMO, adult material masturbation, is not doing any good for you, and your life will be better without these things. That's a hypothesis. Experiment with it. I mean, you can try anything for a week, and that's what I did. And I think I made it a week, and energy levels go up, anxiety goes down, you become more grounded, you feel less social anxiety, you sleep deeper and you sleep for longer. Um, and this happens very, very quickly. Within, I think, the third day or fourth day for me, I started to experience these things,
Mhm.
and I thought, okay, there's something in this for me that is beyond personal anecdotes of the things that I read. There's something tangible here. Um, and then I went through the trials and tribulations of realizing that this is still something that I need to work on.
Mhm.
And through combining some powerful, all the aforementioned things that we talked about, because all they are is an attempt to create space between yourself and the body,
Mhm.
and recognize that, I had a lot of success with, well, if I feel hungry, I don't need to eat. If I feel the allure of, the sexual reflex, it doesn't mean that I need to go to PMO.
Mhm.
And that started to get stronger and stronger. And then, weeks turned into, months. And then, I stopped counting after a long time because, similar to the analogy that I gave with the smoker, it was just serving as something that I felt like I was still attached to.
Mhm.
And you speak about, I suppose, maybe I'll talk about revelations. I mean, the more and more insight that I get when I get those moments of serendipity and synchronicity, is that I really just feel that a lot of this is about who has the most life, really. I think there's a real powerful magnetic, auric, and almost quantum, like a quantum influence of the individuals that hold the most life.
Mhm.
And the reason that, I mean, this is the penultimate reason. I don't want to maybe go into the cliche angles of attraction and magnetism, because I believe they're a cause. Sorry, I believe they're an effect. I don't believe that they're necessarily a cause.
Mhm.
The cause is that the reason why luck befalls you, why energy is granted to you in abundance,
Mhm.
in the reason your anxiety is wiped from your body, is because you are holding more life in your
Mhm.
body.
Mhm.
And that is essentially that this is essentially the crux of the point. And if I can try and convey it in the simplest way, that's what I will say. But maybe just to pass this out a little bit more before I hand it back over to you, there's so many different levels that you can analyze it from. I mean, you can analyze it from, let's say, the endocrine level, right?
Mhm.
Which is the notion that as you begin to refrain more and more, your anabolic hormones are going to become more sensitive towards their expression.
Mhm.
I did a book on masculine gene expression where I uh, explored this extensively. There's one um, study that I reference, which basically describes that mammalian voles, I believe they're Mandarin voles, and essentially, if you leave a vole in an environment where it's allowed to copulate to exhaustion, and they do an analysis on the brain tissue, they found that the androgenic receptors in the vole had shrunk.
Mhm.
So basically, the idea that testosterone, DHT, DHEA will not express itself to the same levels as it would comparatively to a vole who was left in an environment where he wasn't copulating to exhaustion.
Mhm.
So the big rebuttal often people will give is in reference to a Chinese study where men were left abstinent and testosterone goes 145.7%, but then it goes back down to baseline. It is true, but it's only half the story. The reason why you would get more masculine features is because the testosterone molecules, the androgen molecules, can express itself more fully
Mhm.
because the receptor is more
Mhm.
sensitive. Um, so that's on an endocrine level. It's very, very easy, and that's all scientific, by the way. So again, if you're really trying to hard sell somebody, that's concrete, empirical, objective evidence that is incontrovertible, which describes that the longer and longer you leave yourself alone, the more sensitive you will become to anabolic tissue and anabolic hormones.
Mhm.
That's just a fact, right? You can approach this again, perhaps on the level of where else can we go with it? Neurological,
Yeah.
which is we kind of talked about that already, which is the idea that between your synaptic clefts, you've got this uptake of dopamine. If you leave yourself alone, then you're gonna be more sensitive towards novel things in life, music, going outside, nature, things like that. Um, from a social level, there's certainly more from a social and emotional level. I actually believe that this is the most compelling reason why people see the social, emotional, and mental level. Why I believe people see the most benefits, and I actually think it's because, and people probably won't like this, but it goes back to what I said about what you choose to believe is true.
Mhm.
If you stop doing things that make you feel shame and guilt, you ultimately will have a higher self-conception of yourself,
Mhm.
right? I really can't underestimate, and you should never underestimate how powerful it is to think of yourself as a person that you want to be.
Mhm.
Most men don't have a very high opinion of themselves, and that becomes their undoing immediately, especially in social context. Maybe if they want to build rapport with women and ultimately spark up a relationship, or maybe if they want to get new friends. Not a lot of men have friends nowadays. If your conception of yourself is of somebody who has no vices, is free from all these lower emotions, and you genuinely have a very high opinion of yourself,
Mhm.
you will find making these social relationships very, very easy. Like, imagine if you thought of yourself as your best friend. Not a lot of people have that opinion of themselves. If you genuinely, and there's a difference between faking this and then genuinely believing it, right?
Mhm.
Because a lot of men will say, well, I think I'm a good person, right? But deep down inside, maybe they don't want to admit that to themselves. But if you genuinely believe in your heart that you are of high value, it means, and I've been using this word a lot, it means that you're very congruent. And congruent, if you're unfamiliar with the term, just those listening, it just means alignment with oneself, right? It means that, and this is why women shit test you, actually, because they may believe that you're putting on a show or an act, a facade or a false front. So they kind of poke you and prod you and go, are you real? Are you really this guy? Are you really, if I do this, are you going to react in the same way that this cool, calm, and collected stoic is? You need to be the same person, whether you're talking to the waiter, to the person behind the till, to when you're meeting her family, when you're talking with your friends, when you're talking to a stranger, when you're talking to your family. You just need to be consistent. And that's why I believe SR is so powerful, is because if you wipe these lower negative emotions away from yourself, it allows you to be very, very congruent, very, very consistent. And that, I believe, out of all of them, if you're going to tally it up, in my experience, that is one of the most powerful influences behind the aforementioned benefits.
Yeah, and this can be bridged upon more into the spiritual realms of what you said right there with alignment. Due to these practices that you do when it comes to not just renouncing, because what you mentioned previously about a smoker who says, I'm 75 days no cigarettes, I'm 45 days no alcohol, whatever it is, they are at the same time repressing that energy. But what I noticed that you talk about within your actual content is you give people outlets for this energy, especially the sexual energy, to be transmuted in other different ways. So essentially what they're doing is, instead of that energy being stuck and only being expressed in ways that brings shame, guilt, and all these things, and they're thinking about, oh man, I have all these urges, I can't express them, or I'm going to get shame and guilt. Then they're just kind of waiting until they pop like a firework, until they pop like a balloon. You're giving them actual techniques when it comes to pranayama, breath work, meditation. You're talking about things like working out, talking about things like creativity, and all these things give them outlets for that same energy that was once considered lust, and turning them into creative endeavors, into physical pursuits, all that stuff. And what that's doing, coming back to that original notion, is cleansing people's karmas in order for them to discover their dharma, which is their destiny, which is their duty. They're living in alignment to who and what they truly are, beyond name and form, beyond just the brain and body, who they are and what they were really brought here to do, instead of just, like you said in the beginning of this podcast, your younger self was only living life revolving around pleasures. Like, of course, the earth revolves around the sun. You, and most people, I'm not just saying you, but most people, that sun is not their true self. It's not true happiness, not true bliss. It's a quick hit of dopamine that they can get from this, from that. And once you start to cleanse those shackles, or you break free from those shackles, you break free from those barriers that's keeping you a slave to your senses through these different types of practices, that's why you feel more of that alignment towards who and what you truly are. And you don't have to put on this front of like, I have to act in this certain way to attract this certain person, because you're not trying to attract or trying to do this or that. You're simply living in that present state, and life just becomes more lucky, if you want to call it that. But in my eyes, it's not luck. It's just that path that you were always meant to be on finally starts to light up in front of you. Oh man, this is what I've been missing out on this entire time. Everyone told me to zag, but now I'm finally zigging, and now I'm finding the journey towards true bliss, true freedom of my mind, body, and soul, which is what masculine theory is all about. So when it comes to all these different types of practices that you're talking about in your pieces of content, I want to ask you, essentially, before we wrap things up, whenever somebody clicks on to a masculine theory video, whenever they read one of your books, whenever they maybe join into your coaching program, whatever it is, what is the end message, if you could summarize it into something, of course, this is much broader than just one sentence, two sentences, three sentences, but if you could summarize what your goal is every time that somebody clicks onto a video, and if you could leave everybody with this either thought in their mind, specific change within their internal system, or just a theory, masculine theory, that they can run with into their own philosophy of life, what would that be? And you can start off, of course, by thinking about your younger self in that same kind of example and a preface of what do you want him to carry along when it comes to clicking on any source of content that you have.
It's gonna sound cliche, but the answer is really just be here now. I mean, that really is it. If you're gonna look at all the practices and what road they're trying to take you towards, really, the answer is just, are you here? Are you here right now? Are you present in the moment? Irrespective of its fasting or its meditation or its SR or its breath work, the outcome is always presence. It always has been and it always will be. And the reason why it's so powerful is because it's true. It's truth. That's what it is. I mean, you were talking about, being in alignment with yourself, and the answer is, you're just being true right now. There's no need for me to act. I'm not appearing more attractive to others because I'm donning a character that I can't keep going. I just have nothing to hide anymore, right? I'm just being authentically me. And again, I know that sounds very, very trite to say, but I'll just reiterate what I said. It's not something you can understand. Like, it's not intellectual. It's not something that you can, it will finally come to you. It's something that you experience, and then the mind comes back on, and then you go, oh, for those 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds, it happened, and I was just in that flow of life. One of the analogies I like to use is, if you're in a river, presence is when you're right in the median of the river, but most people kind of jump up against the banks, and they're grabbing against the rocks, and they're in the mud, and they're going through life with so much friction, right? Presence is when you just kind of relax, detach, let go, and you fall into the stream, into the belly of the river, where the water's the deepest, and you're flowing. There's no friction. You're as crass as it sounds, you're lubed up. You're slipping through life really, really easily. And it's not that you don't have any influence on it. It's just like, it's almost like you become that kid again. You become that kid where everything is just play to you, where there's a sense of whimsy. And what I will say to those who perhaps will have rebuttals is that it will never work out in the way that you expect it to.
Yeah.
But you always get but it's the biggest adventure of your life, and you'll be right where you need to be for the lessons that you need to learn to reduce your karmic debt, fundamentally. So try to take your one book, one very short book, actually. I'll just leave you on, which I think explains the point perfectly in a really good narrative. And I never read narratives, by the way. Is The Path of Surrender by Michael Singer. It's about a 200-page book. You could probably read it in 1 or 2 days, and it is just a tremendous story about a man who was, again, up against the kind of friction, the side of the river, really having a hard time going through life. And this is a spiritual individual, right? Like, he's up against the side of the river, and he's, meditating and practicing yoga every single day. And life is kind of calling him, going, Michael, you can't be an ascetic. You can't go and live in the woods and meditate and practice yoga and think that you're going to reach enlightenment. you're here, you've incarnated on this earth for a reason, and we're kind of throwing opportunities your way, but you're ignoring them. Hence the pathway of surrender. Surrender, be present with what's happening in front of you, and accept God's calling. And it's an amazing story about a guy who goes from literally that, an ascetic in the woods who wants to practice nothing but yoga, to owning like a $200 million computer business. Again, and the premise is, again, I had no idea this was going to happen. I never even wanted this to happen, but it was the best experience and the funnest experience of my life.
Yeah. I definitely need to check that out. And that kind of brings into the whole idea of flowing with the current of life. Like, this guy expected himself, okay, I believe that if I practice yoga, just do meditation all day, just become an ascetic, I'll reach enlightenment. That's what he thought. That's what the ego thought. Even though it's a spiritual thing, this is the spiritual ego. It's still saying, let me take control. Let me take control of the driver, the steering wheel, instead of letting God just drive it towards where it was already gonna go. And for someone that might be, they want to become a spiritual monk, and in reality their dharma or their destiny pulls them towards becoming a CEO. Some people is the exact opposite. They just want to become the CEO, the business guy, the top G, whatever it is. Yet their dharma or destiny is pulling them into the monk life. It's usually, funny enough, like everything that I've experienced so far in my journey in life, whatever you expect, it's gonna be almost the exact opposite. So learning how to just, like you said, surrender to the flow, you won't have those expectations that cause you so much turmoil and friction of like, oh man, this is the only way that I think I can be successful in life because of all the programming around me. If you let go of that, as the Bible says, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and everything else is going to be given to you. The path will be paved out for you. You just got to fucking walk on it. You just got to walk on it. It'll start to unfold if you just take that first step. So that's amazing to hear when it comes to the overall message that you're trying to get people on when it comes to masculine theory, of just be here now and just start to flow with life, and use, of course, all these practices that help you further flow with the current of life. So that's what it's all about, and I really love it, and I really do respect and admire your work. I don't really listen to many people on YouTube or all these types of things, but you've been someone that I've been watching for quite some time now, and I'm like, damn, he knows what he's talking about. He's not, because the way you're conversing these types of opinions and these ideas is what you just said right there. You're not trying to convince anyone through intellectual analysis. It's through direct experience, and that's how knowledge turns into gnosis, where knowledge of the mind starts to get integrated into the heart through firsthand experience, and it becomes something that you can rely and depend on, and you're slowly but surely helping your audience to that point. So before we wrap things up, man, I want to ask you, I know that you just dropped that masculine gene expression book, but what do you got cooking up in the oven for the near future, about maybe some new projects, some new adventures, some new ideas, and just things that you got going on within your life as well as masculine theory that we can be plugged into?
Cool. I just want to say thank you very much for the kind words. I really do appreciate that. It's always really nice to hear.
Of course.
In terms of future projects at the moment, so I am as we kind of preface the call, I am in the midst of moving from the UK to Thailand at the moment. So that's going to take up a lot of my time. But really, one of the primary motivations behind the move is to kind of move to an area, a continent that is a little bit more spiritually conscious, and somewhere that aligns with my values a little bit more. As much as I am open and receptive to the different opportunities that come my way, one of my big intentions is just to really popularize and make accessible some of the greatest resources for practicing breath work and also meditation to the best of my abilities. So again, I had in mind Asia just because I believe it is one of the most aesthetically and visually beautiful places in the world. I'm going to be taking my camera, my equipment, and going out to if it's the north of Thailand up into the mountains. It's a Buddhist country, so there's lots of temples and lots of places where they practice the kinds of things that I've been teaching. Or if it's down in the south, to places like Koh Phangan, to the beaches and the blue seas, to just give as much as it is a visual experience, but also inspiration, for me. And I really believe in breathwork, pranayama, specifically as a tool that can really, going back to what I said, throw you so intensely into the now that it's incontrovertible. I mean that combination with meditation, I believe, will get you present like nothing else can. And there's no additives, there's no psychedelics, there's nothing I have really for you other than to use this equipment that you have, to sit down with intention and to use the tool of the breath. And that's what I'm going to be working on with intention for at least until the end of the year, and continue to. But in respects to other projects, I'm always open and receptive to learning. I do have a long list of different things that I want to look into: astral projection, lucid dreaming. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So before we wrap things up, let them know where to find you at. I know that you're on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. I'll put all this stuff, of course, in the description, but just plug in all your information so people can find you in all these different platforms.
If you just search Masculine Theory on pretty much every platform, apart from maybe Instagram, it's The Masculine Theory, you'll find me.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, appreciate you joining the podcast, man. That was a great conversation. And of course, like we said, even before this call, this was an hour 15. We can go for probably 15 hours just straight up, because
well, we could do another one when I'm in Thailand.
Oh yeah, man, let's do it out in the mountains. Let's go out there in the mountains, do it in person, so we can just see, hey man, Joseph, Ali, we're not just talking the talk, but we're actually walking the walk, doing pranayama right before a podcast. That's how you're supposed to do it. So appreciate you once again, man, for dropping all the game, dropping all the wisdom, not only on this podcast, but just in your platform as a whole, because like we said, there's so much nonsense out in the world today, and a lot of men can just get sucked up into that very quickly because it's right there and right in front of them. But having almost sanctuaries like your channel, and hopefully my channel is kind of providing that same thing too, where people can, or men can, finally start to realize that there's more to life than just what they are shoveling down our throats about just survival, sex, and status, and see that they can actually be present and flow with life through these practices that, of course, that have been all the way back down time in these ancient traditions told to us, but it's now like the revival process that's happening. So once again, really appreciate all the work that you're doing. Really appreciate you joining the podcast, man. And hopefully we'll get a part 2 out in Thailand sometime soon.
Cool. Again, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And yeah, speak soon, everyone.
Of course, brother. Take care.